Going on a bear hunt. I grew up on a country road, a back road with next to no traffic. Our nearest neighbor, an elderly lady that we called Grandma, had 2 adult sons, Stuart and Russell. The 3 of them worked their 100-acre farm of goats, pigs, and chickens. They depended on these animals for their livelihood. What year it was, I cannot recall, but it was somewhere in the mid-60s. My brother Paul would have been about 10 years old, and I was about 12. It was a warm summer night, the kind of night when you don't want to be inside a stuffy house, the kind of night that calls you to be outside, to breathe in the sweet smell of dried grass. Paul and I were snuggled down in our respective sleeping bags, prepared to spend the night on the front lawn, stargazing. A little bat flitted in and out of our vision. The odd mosquito memed in our ears. Then suddenly, the night air was rent by a loud We stared at each other wide-eyed. Did someone shoot a bear? Every so often, bears raided our fruit trees, but they did love a good feed of meat every now and again, and we were used to hearing tales of bears hauling the occasional pig up the mountain. Paul and I scrambled out of our bags and dashed for the kitchen door, shouting as we went, "Mom! Dad! We heard a gunshot!" Mom and Dad left their easy chairs to join us in the kitchen. Mom looked hard at Dad and muttered, "That man and his gun." Dad slowly scratched the back of his head and mumbled, "Yeah, I suppose." Mom, noticing Paul and myself, said, "You kids better stay indoors tonight." Just then, our dog Buster scrambled to his feet and focused on the kitchen door with his hair raised and growled. Dad stepped outside onto the porch just in time to see Stuart striding purposefully down the driveway, tall and lanky, wearing worn-out blue jeans, his gumboots covered in dried pig manure, a rifle in one hand and a glass kerosene lantern in the other. His big dog stood awkwardly next to him. Stuart scowled at Dad. "I wounded a bear. I need your help." Dad nodded his head and said, "Give me a minute. I'll get my shoes on." Just then, Paul burst out with, "I want to come." So I shouted, "Me too. I want to come too." Stuart stepped back out of the range of the kitchen light as if to dissolve himself from a family dispute about to erupt. Mom shook her head and said, No, you're not going anywhere. It's too dangerous." "A wounded bear?" "No, you're staying inside." Just then, Dad returned to the kitchen with his rifle and a lantern. Both Paul and I immediately turned to Dad. "Please, Dad, please, can we come? Please." Why, if this wasn't to be the highlight of the whole summer, I didn't know what was. This desire gripped us like a fever. We had to go. We just had to. Dad looked over our heads at Mom. Mom folded her arms across her chest and continued to shake her head. Dad then gave us a stern look and said, "Just don't get in anyone's way." Then stepping outside, he said to Stuart, "Better get going." Paul and I dashed out behind them, letting the screen door bang shut behind us. We could barely keep up with the 2 men as they strode off down the road into the darkness. The only light was from the 2 lanterns swinging a small yellow circle low to the ground, while the white dusty road gave off a light of its own. The silence of the men and the hurried crunch of gravel under our shoes lent an urgency to the situation. We walked and walked. The dust rose from our feet and choked in my throat that had now become dry with fear. The reality of what we were doing was beginning to dawn on me. I slowed down a bit, and Paul did likewise. Out of earshot of the men, I hurriedly whispered to Paul, "Do you still want to do this?" Paul's eyes seemed huge in his face. "Yeah," he said, "I think so. We better keep up." And with that decision made, we scurried to catch up, which was just in time as the men veered off the road and down the trail that led to the pig pen. Now, Grandma was a no-nonsense German woman. She loved us dearly as if we were her own grandchildren, but she didn't tolerate foolishness, and one of her firmly laid down rules was to stay away from the pigs. Pigs, she claimed, have been known to devour grown men. And kids? Why, kids just sitting on the fence could fall in and pigs would tear off their legs and arms as if they were nothing but little snacks. Us kids could never see how those big dumb animals rooting and snuffling around could be so vicious. But the fear of getting Grandma's dander up was enough reason for us to stay clear of the place. Now here we were in what seemed like the middle of the night, walking alongside the pig pen, in the dark, looking for a wounded bear. I wondered what Grandma would say about this when she found out. Stuart, leading the way along the narrow path, stopped. We could barely make out the shape of the pigsty. Nothing stirred, as though there were no pigs in there at all. Everything seemed so peaceful, as though nothing was amiss. Then Stuart, in his deep, gravelly voice, said, "I was right about here. The big brute was in the pig pen right over there. When I shot him, he headed over the fence in that direction." Together, we continued along the fence line to the spot where the bear was last seen. Stuart held his lantern close to the ground, and sure enough, there was blood. The men noticed the broken and crushed salal leaves and began to follow the direction the bear had taken. The tangle of bush was as high as Paul's and my shoulders. We tried to stay as close to Dad as possible, but branches that Dad pushed through were slapping us in the face. We whimpered and mewled our protest. Dad snarled at us, "Shh, be quiet." Onward we pushed, fighting our way through the dense undergrowth, further and further into this mass of salal and fallen branches. Stuart stopped. Dad stopped. Paul and I stopped. My heart hammered. My shirt was sticking to my back with sweat, and the mosquitoes had moved in. The silence was thick, heavy, and hot all around us. The blackness of the night was like staring into molasses. Stuart tilted his chin towards the top branches of a nearby tree and murmured, "He's up there." Dad, Paul, and I craned our necks and stared as hard as we could into the darkness. I wanted to see the bear. Where was the bear? Stuart passed his lantern to Dad and whispered, "Hold it high so I can see." Dad told us to step back. We climbed back over the fallen tree that was behind us. I remember thinking that this would give us some sort of barrier between us and what was about to happen. Dad laid his rifle down and held both lanterns high. Without waiting a second longer, Stuart's gunshot rang out. Branches overhead started to break. Tree cones and debris showered us. Stuart yelled, "He's coming down!" Dad stepped backwards and fell over the fallen tree. One of the lanterns flew from his hand, shattering the glass and extinguishing the light. The other lantern toppled over. Dad yelped. Then we heard Stuart yell, "There's another one! There's two of them! One just came down!" The sound of thrashing branches seemed to be all around us. Thoughts of a bear covered in blood falling on top of Dad was too much to think about. I turned and ran. So did Paul. We had a vague idea which way to go. Branches slapped at our head, arms, and legs. We didn't even notice those branches. We just ran and ran until we burst through the thick tangle of salal onto the road, leaving the blackness of the bush behind. It was such a relief to see the beautiful, beautiful chalky white road again. We stood there panting hard. Then just as fast as we had bolted, the guilt washed over us. We looked sheepishly at each other and started to babble. "We left Dad in there, with the bears. Holy jeez, there were 2 bears. Do you think they're okay? Well, they had rifles, didn't they? Maybe Mom was right. We should have stayed at home. Too late to think about that now." Just then, we heard another gun. We stared dumbfounded at each other. Stuart just shot the second bear, right? Yeah, he must have. The first bear was already shot, right? Yeah, it was dead. And now the second bear is dead. right? Yeah, you're right. They're both dead. And with that comforting thought, Paul and I walked home.